Alright, so welcome back, everyone. So, how do I begin this video? Well, on this video, I wanted to focus on some things about European heritage that I think have been forgotten about, or that a certain sort of subgroup of people don't really talk about. What we perceive as traditionally European culture isn't really European culture. What is traditionally European culture, what European culture was before it was influenced by other cultures, is very different than what we know and understand European culture today, or even many centuries of it, in fact. So, why am I bringing this up? I don't really want to say, but European culture, the European world is not this really weird conformist, women second-class citizens, sort of homophobic culture that particular ideologues seem to think is the original white European way. Not exactly. European culture is based, actually, the original Europeans, there are a lot of different tribes, a lot of different ones. You had the Druids, you had you had the Celts, you had the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths. You had a lot of different tribes of people in Europe, like tons. And I find it vastly interesting that the British royal monarchy started before the Greek empire of democracy was created. To this day, the British royal monarchy is the longest standing system of government human beings have ever created. I mean, that line, the royal monarchy, is really fucking long. It's old as fuck. Granted, the Queen doesn't have the power today that the royal family used to, but it's still around thousands of years later. The original Europeans were polytheistic. They were pagans. They had different versions of polytheistic religions, but the Europeans were pagans. That's the original religion of the European people, was paganism. And in pagan culture, this whole, anti-sex thing that this puritanical idea that we have towards sexuality, that wasn't a thing to the pagan culture. In fact, the pagans from the Greek Empire used a particular plant as a contraceptive to engage in their wild orgies, their mass sex parties. There's a plant that they use as a contraceptive. It was so effective, that plant is now extinct. It's no longer in existence. They used it until it was gone. Homosexuality did not become a bad thing until actually homosexuality and women being treated as secondary class citizens did not become a thing until the three Abrahamic religions came into being, which would be Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Those are the three Abrahamic religions. Until those religions showed up, no culture almost anywhere in the world none of them cared about homosexuality. None of them cared about trans people. None of them cared about female empowerment or women being in control and having a say-so in their own life until the three Abrahamic religions came into being. I'm not lying about this. This is true. Another thing that Europeans started and became very successful at was multiculturalism. They would get people from other tribes and other cultures. The Greeks were really well known for this, although it is debatable on whether or not the Greeks would be considered white. They were more kind of Mediterranean. Same with the Romans. That's debatable. However, the people in Europe at the time would absolutely tell you, the pagan Europe people, the original Europeans, would tell you, no, that they weren't part of the white or Aryan nation. They would have been Mediterranean. But the Greeks accepted these people into their culture, and they were able to keep aspects of their culture as long as you could accept one philosophy. And that is another thing that Western civilization has invented, which is secularism, separation of religious ideology, because they noticed that all these different tribes and people had different variations of gods, goddesses, deities, and most of them practice the same sacred days, though, having to do with the equinoxes and the change of seasons. And in fact, a lot of that was even worked into the three Abrahamic religions. And I'm not going to go into that. But the original Europeans didn't even have a word for homosexuality. They just considered it to be a part of life. It wasn't some kind of deviance or anything like that. It was just, some people are that way. It's just part of the world we live in. They didn't think anything of it. So much to the point there wasn't even a word for it to describe what it was. That's interesting. That's pretty forward thinking if you think about it. So female leaders, there are shit tons of them. There are shit tons of female leaders, and even after Christianity was introduced. Like Elizabeth I, she kind of had somewhat close to a secular idealism when she said that she would hold her people accountable for their crimes, not their religion. Of course, she was pertaining to Catholic versus Protestant, but still in those days, if you were deemed a heretic or a witch, you were burned at the stake. So, I'm bringing this up because there's some people out there that they have in their heads this concept of what European means, that even culture is genetically inherited. Culture is not genetically inherited. It's a learned behavior. In fact, here in America, we have a very, very different culture than our European counterparts. In fact, it's my understanding a lot of Europeans find Americans to be very obnoxious and annoying. We have bastardized the English language, according to the English. And we just have a very just our culture, the people that we have here, I think they perceive us as being very like abrupt or rude, boisterous, in your face, kind of attitude, standoffish. I don't know, but that's the understanding that I get from talking to people from other Western civilizations, of their perspective of Americans. And there's even different cultures within America. Eastern culture is different than Southern culture. It's different than Central, Midwestern culture, Northern culture. Did I mention West? Yeah, the West Coast culture. There's even cultures that are different from state to state. So culture is not something that you are born with genetically, and anyone that tells you that is just fucking retarded. I mean, seriously. I think in this day and age, with our neurological science, our understanding of psychology and all that, it's pretty well fucking evident. Culture is a learned behavior. It is not something you come out of the womb with, bearing a fucking cross or a Buddha in your hand based on your race. That is ridiculous. That is absurd, ridiculous, annoying. Like, that is so stupid. It is annoying. But I just wanted to bring up what the original European really was. They were polytheistic pagans. They were egalitarian. They weren't so much humanitarian. There was a lot of barbarism back then. A lot of slavery of white people enslaving other white people. So, I can't say humanitarian, but egalitarian that they were. And they were very accepting of things that a certain particular sect or group of people would consider deviant today. They didn't consider those things deviants. They just considered it a part of life. So where did all that concept come from? Well, it came from the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. But we're going to focus on Christianity. Why? Well, because Christianity had a big influence over the Greek and the Romans. In fact, the Romans even created the Catholic Church, which ended up putting a lot of pressure on the pagans of Europe, and ended up forcing that religion upon the Europeans, where women were to be treated as secondary class citizens, and homosexuality still didn't have a name, but the Catholic Church started calling them sodomites. So, if you don't believe me on that the original Europeans were much more inclusive than modern day Europeans. We're actually returning, like the liberalism is actually returning to a time that we actually have been to before. It's not deviating, it's something that we have seen and we have done before. If you don't believe me on this, okay, but another thing I gotta add, Christianity, the three Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. You're gonna say no doubt on Islam, and probably Judaism. But Christianity is not a concept of Europe. It comes from the Middle East and caught on in the Mediterranean area, which is close to the fucking Middle East. And then they pushed it onto Europe. And Europe didn't go quietly. In fact, St. Patrick's Day was one of the ways that the Christians tried to indoctrinate the pagan people of Ireland into becoming Christian. They made that up. They made up bullshit to try and indoctrinate them into Christianity. They did this across Europe. They took Europe with an ideology. I'm not shitting you. So if you don't believe me on these things, I have some things to show you about European history.
This is Boudicca. She was a Celtic queen of the Iceni tribe of modern-day East Anglia, Britain. She led a revolt against Rome in 6061 CE, from 60 to 61. We're talking about double-digit years here. She finally, I think the documents date, the documents about Boudicca, end around year 235 CE by Cassius Dio. She led a revolt against the Roman Empire over a debt. Well, it was a dispute over a loan. But she was known as a fierce warrior, and actually she presented quite a big problem for the Roman Empire, even though the Romans were well over classified to take them on. What they underestimated about the Celts and their queen was how ferocious they could be in battle. And just in case you doubt me about the original religion of the people of Europe, and well, here's the thing about it. Little is known about the prehistoric religion of the Neolithic Europe, Bronze and Iron Age religion in Europe, as elsewhere was predominantly polytheistic. Ancient Greek religion, ancient Roman religion, Basque mythology, Finnish paganism, Celtic polytheism, Germanic paganism, etc. They were pagans. This is where we're seeing a revival of some of these religions and things like Wicca, the Druids, shit like that. I mean, the original Europeans had no concept of what is known today as the European social identity that is really based off of the three Abrahamic religions, predominantly Christianity for Europe. Seriously, the original Europeans did not follow the tenets of Christianity. That didn't become a thing until the kind of Christian empire started to overthrow them. This is about King James VI, but actually there was a king before him that was, before the Tudors even, that has two halls that still stand in England today. This king who built these two halls, they were dance halls, celebration halls, was a homosexual. At the time that this king, not King James VI, the Roman Church had already had influence over England by King James VI, but at this time, the Catholic Roman Church didn't have as much of a pull over England, and still most of England was very much polytheistic pagans. And they had a gay king. He was eventually murdered, I believe, by his own brother, and it was for the seat of the throne, not because he was homosexual. See, what you have to understand is that the pagans, the polytheistic people, they didn't really have a hang-up about female empowerment or anything with homosexuals. In fact, they didn't have a name for homosexuality until the 1900s. The term was coined homosexuality. That came from psychology. The word faggot comes from a historical reference from the witch trials, the witch burnings, in which, it's not a secret that the people of the village that were not favorable were called faggots. And the reason why they were called faggots is because they were meant to go out into the woods and gather a bundle of sticks, or a faggot, kindling, to burn a witch. Well, what they would do with the sodomites, because this is what the Catholic Church called them, was the sodomites. They would douse them in kerosene oil and use them to light the fire to burn a witch. But the original English, the original European people were polytheistic pagans, and they considered basically homosexuality to be a part of life. They didn't really have a hang-up about it. It wasn't a big deal, and it wasn't a big deal for women to have power either. They were actually kind of egalitarian. So our society is really kind of moving more towards the way that it used to be. We're not changing it to something that never has been. We're changing it to the way it originally was. So, just to let you know that there have been gay kings and queens of England.
So, just so we're clear, I tried to look for the first king of England that was a homosexual, because when that king was overseeing England, the people the people of England were still pagans at that time. This was before King James the Sixth. Okay, this was long before that. The Catholic Church was in existence. The Roman Church was in existence at that time. However, they didn't have the authority over Europe that they would eventually come to have. They would report about him, and they wrote documentations about him, but they weren't very favorable because he was a sodomite, a homosexual. And he was murdered by his own brother, I do believe, while he was out hunting. He that was one of his favorite activities, was hunting. And it was ultimately for the throne. It wasn't because he was a homosexual or anything like that. The pagans never cared about that. And to this day, even in Europe and even here in the United States, we're seeing a revival of these pagan movements. We're seeing people who celebrate the Druids, people who celebrate Wicca, people who celebrate Nordic religions, things like Thor. We have people that celebrate the Celtic. I think I said that already. And there's even a subscriber of mine that studies where the Aryan race, the idea of Aryan came from a particular tribe of people from Europe. They were pagans. They were all pagans, and they let women be in power. There wasn't this power struggle between men and women. That wasn't a thing. They didn't care. They were egalitarian. Believe it or not, this is real. This is true. Christianity came to form what we understand as the European world today. And that particular belief, philosophy, did not come from Europe. It came from the Middle East. And actually, if you look at the tenets of Christianity, a lot of it mimics that of the Egyptian religion. Fuck, the Ten Commandments are in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I'm not even fucking joking about that. I'm totally fucking serious about it. It's all fucking Middle Eastern shit. Everything about the three Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all of it came from the Middle East. All of it. And until Christianity swept across the European nation by force, the Europeans were originally pagans. So, to a particular group of people out there, no, this whole ideology that Europeans were these well-to-do, prim, proper... No, that's not the original European. That's the Europeans that were influenced by a Middle Eastern religion that was pushed onto them by the Mediterranean people, by the Roman Empire that created Catholicism. Some pretty shitlord stuff there. So, the idea is then that if we have, and I understand that some aspects of particular types of cultures are incompatible with others, but that's why I mentioned secularism. Secularism came from Europe. The Enlightenment came from Europe. And for the most part, multiculturalism works. In fact, I went around asking random people if they felt that multiculturalism works. And basically everybody was like, yeah, look around you, we live in it. Now, I understand there are some European nations to this day where that's a little bit of a different concept, because their country is still predominantly their country. Well, yeah, but you have to understand the history of the United States. The United States has been a multicultural place for a very, very long time. It's not new. And being multicultural isn't a new concept either. The Greeks came up with that first. It's a very intriguing idea, but you need secularism to make it work. Separation of belief and state. That comes with democracy. So the founding fathers of this country, the people who created this country, they were escaping the monarchical dictatorship. Monarchy is a dictatorship of the Crown of England. They wanted to escape that. And when they created the Constitution, they wanted to make sure that the United States would never succumb to a dictatorship ever again. That we would never, ever be under the thumb of any type of totalitarian dictatorship regime. They were almost kind of quasi-anarchists. In fact, all the drugs that are illegal today did not become illegal until the 1920s. Prostitution did not become illegal until the 1920s. In fact, some of the founding fathers of this country engaged with prostitution. They engaged with drug habits. George Washington himself wrote a book about growing marijuana and how, oddly, he printed in his book why it was so important to separate the males from the females. There's only one reason you do that, and it's not to make fucking clothes and hemp products. It's to smoke the female. He wanted to plant marijuana on Mount Vernon. The people who founded this country wanted to give us as much freedom as possible without erupting into complete chaotic anarchy, understanding that there needed to be some kind of structure involved. Hence, we have a democratic republic or a constitutional democracy. That's what they wanted to have because they wanted to escape any type of authoritarian regime controlling the United States. That this was a country that was founded for the people, by the people. That's why it says on the Constitution, we the people, for the people, by the people. And why we fought the British Army was to gain our sovereignty away from the dictatorship of the royal crown. There is a group of people out there that would like to have the United States basically be a white version of North Korea. I can't imagine this. I cannot imagine. Can you imagine somebody coming up to you saying, I would like to live under North Korea? Okay, why would you like to live under North Korea? Well, because they have ironclad authoritarianism. What? That is just wow. Wow. Don't know why you would want to do that. But, to each their own. To each their own. So, the idea of this particular group of people is that if we eradicate multiculturalism and make an entirely white nation, there will be no crimes. But there's somewhat of a problem with that argument, because I don't think multiculturalism is responsible for the crimes, and here's why.
Alright, even though Thunderfoot already covered this, I guess we're gonna do this again. This is from the FBI's statistics. Alright, so suppose you get a white ethno-state. Oh, that's supposed to fix all the world's fucking problems, is it? Well, yeah. Except there's a problem here. When it comes to crime, we actually are kind of racialized. Because the truth of the matter is if you are white, you have a 80% likelihood, if you are going to be killed, you have an 80% likelihood of being killed by another white person. If you are black, you have about the same percentage of being killed by another black person. And as Thunderfoot pointed out before, the really interesting thing is when you get into male and female is that it's almost always the males that are victims. Always. Like the majority of the time, it's males that get murdered, whether it's a female committing the act or a male committing the act. So white males are more likely to kill another white male. Black males are more likely to kill another black male. Females are more likely to kill a male. So that's the FBI statistics for you. Is the black community, they're not going around just like farming over fucking white people. That's not happening. That's not like a fucking thing. It's not. Thunderfoot already covered that, so I'm just doing this briefly. I just want to go back to this again because I really want to beat this home. Like seriously, like for real. Okay, so here's the race of the victim, the person who was killed. They were white. Total 3,499. Race of the offender, the person who killed them. Out of this 3,499 white people who were killed, who were murdered, this is murder. Out of that 3,499, 2,854 of the perpetrators that killed this 3,499, 2,854 of them were white. The other were the amount of black people that partook in the killing of this 3,499 was only 533. Other 40 unknown 72. Male, again, 3,157 of them were male and white. Only 355 were female. 7 were unknown. 789 Hispanic. So really, yeah, right there, okay. So, and again, black or African American, total victim count, 2,870. Amount of white people that killed black people was 243. Amount of black or African American people that killed black or African American people, 2,570. Alright, so, no. Just no. Oh, man, that is a huge damper in the argument, isn't it?
So, as you can see from the FBI statistics, which Thunderfoot already did a video about, it's mostly white people killing other white people, and mostly black people killing other black people. Predominantly males tend to be the target audience of homicide. And I watched an entire, like 5-season series of women that have been locked up, and yeah, pretty much the majority of the victims were male. And yeah, pretty much the majority of the time, it's white on white or black on black. Very rarely did that ever change. And I mean, like, I've watched documentaries about people on death row where they actually get to speak. This is all very interesting stuff. I don't know that a country made entirely of one race equates to no crimes. In fact, such a totalitarian regime, I mean, you can look at China. They're still trying to silence people who like Confucius, because Confucianism is the would argue the opposite of a dictator. And yeah, they try to silence insurgency, but it doesn't really seem to work out all that well. And just people want to leave these places. They just want out. They want to get away. That's why they actually want to come to our countries, Western civilizations, because we have secularist philosophy. We are anti-authoritarian for the most part. You have to have some level of authority because, I mean, you have to have authority to protect us from authoritarians inciting their will on us against our own will. We have to have that. So, you know what? I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but I have to say, I have really had my fill of listening to neo-Nazi talking points. I mean, seriously, I spent days looking through their philosophy and their ideology, and at one point, I've never had a single thought like this cross my mind ever once in my life. I have never looked at the world through a racialized lens, but after days and days of sifting through neo-Nazi, white supremacist ideology and philosophy, I looked at this guy. He was disproportionate, overweight, covered in pimples, and I thought, ew, gross, white people. Ugh. I have never in my whole fucking life looked at a person and was grossed out based on their ethnicity. So, if the idea was to try to convince me to that persuasion, it had the opposite effect on me. After sifting through... Come on, Mama Smokey, don't play with the mic. After days and days of sifting through it, I actually looked at a white person and thought, white people, ew. I was disgusted at white people. Just grossed out by white people. And that's when I realized I gotta stop looking through this shit, because it's gonna turn me into a member of Antifa or fucking hell, I don't know, end up hanging out with the black Israelites or whatever that group is called. Like fuck white people. I mean, I have never had a thought like that in my whole life towards any race. I've never looked at somebody and been like, ew, they're that race. I've never had that thought before. But what was really funny is that I didn't go, ew, black people, after looking through a bunch of Nazi propaganda. I looked at white people and went, ew, gross. And actually, I was further from that thought process before I had started looking into their ideology. That's why I backed out. I was like, no. Don't want to have a racialized lens. That's crazy. I'm not a racialized person. I am egalitarian, humanitarian. And I don't give a flying fuck about somebody's ethnicity. I don't fucking care. I don't give a shit. So, I mean, if you want me to hate the white race, then the little neo-Nazi trolls that keep commenting in my comment section, keep going. I'll end up fucking hating white people. Apparently, that's where Nazi ideology leads me down. It leads me down a dark corridor where I start thinking white people are the grossest, most despicable, disgusting race of creatures I've ever seen in my whole fucking life. I've never been so disgusted before by white people. It's just like so egotistical, arrogant, narcissistic, unable to smell the shit on their own fucking knees. Like, how could anybody think that they're that fucking awesome? Is beyond any comprehension. Now, I realize I was raised by hippies. So a lot of their ideology was very foreign and alien to me, that anyone could... I seriously cannot fucking imagine wanting to live under a dictatorship deliberately. I cannot imagine that. The founding fathers of this country wouldn't be able to imagine that. Like, why the fuck would you go back to fucking Britain then? Honestly. This country, the United States, was founded on the idea and the concept of freedoms and liberty. Not a dictatorship. No. No, they were quasi-anarchists. Seriously, I mean, go back. Like, this is elementary fucking history lessons here about the United States. This isn't even like upscale fucking history lessons that you would get from a college course. This is shit you learn in elementary school. For the love of just fuck. So, no, an ethno-state will not get rid of violence, okay? There's still violence in North Korea. There's still violence in China. There's insurgency. And in fact, there's a growing level of insurgency in the last standing theocracy, which is a type of dictatorship in the Middle East, where they want the same freedoms that us Western civilization people have. So these people, whew, man. Yeah, no, I think I'm staying out of that one. That is a rabbit hole of unrequited hatred. I mean, just gross. Just disgusting. Seriously. Just disgusting. I don't really particularly care for the identity politics, and I think that it's really weird that Antifa creates alt-right people, and I think that neo-Nazis create Antifa members. So, you guys are both kind of trying to put out a fire with gasoline, and I think that is probably not a good idea. And, yeah, I don't think a civil war is going to be happening, and a lot of the things that we are considering problems, like crony capitalism and corporatism, well, they're starting to fix themselves. Congress is actually starting to pay attention. And there's several videos of them basically reaming the shit out of some of these CEOs and corporate empire holders for fucking over the American people. So, once they nip that one in the butt, once crony capitalism and the evils of corporatism have been taken care of, it's all copacetic. But I want you to realize that the original European didn't have a problem with egalitarianism, with females being in power. The original European didn't have a problem with homosexuality. In fact, they didn't even have a word for it. The original Europeans didn't believe in Christianity. They were pagans. So what these people are talking about achieving is a culture that was influenced by a culture that came from the Middle East that was pushed upon the Europeans by force. So you're talking about a culture that was influenced by a Middle Eastern culture. Just to let you know, I know that that'll make a lot of that type of people really angry. But, I mean, it's the truth. So, I am a gnostic atheist and a nihilist, and it's just everything, everyone, everywhere will eventually come to an end. Change is inevitable. You can't stop it. And when change happens, you're faced with two options: adapt and survive. And then there's the latter. And you win the Darwin Award. It's not my rules. That's nature. And you can't change it. And the fact of the matter is the so-called phrase, Amerimuts. Apparently that's what the European neo-Nazis like to refer to the white race of Americans as Amerimuts. Well, we're so mixed at this point here in the United States, at least in the United States. That might very well be true for France and England as well. We're so far mixed at this point. I don't think anyone that is looking at genetics would really care to make a differentiation between the implicit whiteness over the actual genetic definition. Just saying. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell button on any channel you're subscribed to, and with that, out.
Useless work to be done, so they gave me a tin-head, and they gave me a gun, and they sent me away to the war. And the